Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Ladies, Let's Talk About It. I'm your host, Dr. Denise Jagru. I'm a board-certified clinical specialist in women's health physical therapy. Today, we're going to have a conversation with your pelvic floor. When's the last time you had a conversation with your pelvic floor? I'll tell you when. Never. You've never had a conversation with your pelvic floor. Today, we're going to ask our pelvic floors 10 questions. Because normally, we'd only check in when we are in pain or when something's wrong, when we're having some kind of symptoms. But it's important to check in every day. Now, why do I love talking about the pelvic floor? I'm a pelvic floor specialist, and the pelvic floor is my jam. I could talk about the pelvic floor all day. I love talking about it. And actually, I do talk about it all day because this is what I treat in men and women who have pelvic floor dysfunction. So today, we're going to have a conversation with our pelvic floors to check in and see how we're doing. What is the pelvic floor? Pelvic floor is a very complex compound structure of muscles and ligaments and tissue that support your pelvic organs. They connect to the pelvic walls. They contribute to bladder and bowel function because they wrap around the base of the bladder, they wrap around the rectum. They do very important things. They contribute to posture and alignment and core control. I think it's probably the most ignored part of the body because we just can't see it, right? It's not like when you're trying to squeeze your bicep and you can see your bicep moving or your quad. You can't see the pelvic floor. Even though it's so integral in so many parts, it's so many different systems and movement patterns and postural things that we do, we just tend to ignore it. And today, that's gonna stop. We're gonna check in with it. So let's start with our 10 questions that we're gonna ask our pelvic floor. Number 1, pelvic floor, how are you feeling today? And this is such an important question because sometimes we're just holding a lot of tension in our pelvic floor and we don't even realize it. Some people hold their tension in their shoulders and they wear their shoulders as earrings. But some people hold their tension in their pelvis and they don't even realize it. Some people have weak pelvic floors and they're leaking. Maybe they leak a little bit of urine when they cough, laugh, or sneeze. And people aren't even aware of what their pelvic floors are doing or how they're feeling. And like I said before, normally we only check in on it when there's pain or something is wrong, we're exhibiting some kind of symptoms. Then we start paying attention. But it's important to check in with your pelvic floor every day, right? Does your pelvic floor feel tight? Does it feel heavy? Does it feel fatigued? Or does it feel at ease? And it's important to just be aware of that every day, okay? That is question number 1. Question number 2. Do you feel supported or are you carrying too much? And sometimes with our jobs or just in life, we're carrying heavy loads, right? Maybe we are coughing a lot. Maybe you have a chronic cough. Maybe you're straining with constipation and you're straining on the toilet. All this puts a lot of stress on the pelvic floor. And you need to have enough support and strength in the pelvic floor to support that, right? The pelvic floor is part of the core, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But or maybe you're stressed. Maybe you just hold all that tension in your pelvic floor. So it's important to assess how much you're holding in the pelvic floor and if you're supporting all that stress and all that weight with support and stability. Okay? Number 3, are you gripping or guarding right now? The real question is, are you a butt clencher? Like I said, some people hold their tension in their shoulders and some people hold their tension in their pelvic floor, in those muscles in the pelvis. And, if you believe in chakras, energy centers, the root and sacral chakra, that's where we hold all our emotional tension, all of our sexual tension. And sometimes that can cause a lot of other issues. Those muscles in the pelvic floor, again, they wrap around the vaginal canal, they wrap around the base of the bladder, they wrap around the rectum, they connect to the pelvic wall, to the bones in your pelvis. So if those muscles are super tight, it can lead to trigger points, it can lead to spasms, and that can cause all kinds of issues with your bladder and bowel functioning, with your sexual functioning. So holding tension in the pelvis, it's important for you to be aware of that and then take the appropriate steps to address that. So maybe you need to see a pelvic floor physical therapist. Maybe you need to do more, relaxation techniques throughout the day, more yoga, more breathing techniques, more meditation to help calm the pelvic floor. But it's important to know, are you holding your tension in your pelvis? So just being aware of that helps. Number 4, dear pelvic floor, when are you most relaxed? And I love this question too, because maybe it's when you're taking a warm bath or maybe when you're stretching, or when you're meditating. Maybe that's when your pelvic floor relaxes. And it's important to just be aware of that so we can increase those intervals throughout the day. If you're kind of a type A person and you're stressed, we need to factor in and schedule in time during the day where you're in those relaxed periods, right? And we want your pelvic floor to be relaxed and have that tension to be released and have your tissues be soft. So it could be like when you're working out, maybe you tense up your pelvic floor, or when you're on a long commute, or when you're sitting in the car for a long time, right? It could be on a bus or in a car. Maybe you're just tensing up. Maybe you get angry in traffic and maybe you tense up. It's just important to realize when you start to tense up, right? So we can have more intervals in the day where you're not tensed up. Okay. Number 6, am I breathing in a way that's helping you, dear pelvic floor? And people don't realize that the pelvic floor has so much to do with breathing. If you think about the core, most people think about abdominal muscles and back muscles. They're not thinking of like a top and a bottom, right? And when you think about the core, you really want to think about like a canister, like a pistoning canister, right? So you've got your abs in the front and you've got your back muscles in the back, but the top of that canister is your diaphragm. That's your main muscle of respiration. The bottom muscle, those are your pelvic floor muscles. There's layers and layers of muscles there, and it works together with your breathing. So as you exhale, right, and the diaphragm goes up, the pelvic floor muscles naturally contract. There's so many like movement strategies and patterns that are happening in this core and this core control that it's all working together, right? So like if something's off with your diaphragm, maybe your pelvic floor is compensating. If your abs are weak, maybe your back muscles are overworking. So you can't just look at one set of muscles and think the other muscles are not affected. So breathing and working on diaphragmatic breathing, which is breathing from that main muscle of respiration, which is kind of like a dome-shaped muscle tucked up under the ribs, like working on deep breathing with that muscle rather than like puffing out your chest every time you breathe is going to help also relaxing the pelvic floor, right? We got to reset that signal going from the brain to the pelvic floor. And the way we do that is with deep breathing. The movement of the pelvic floor is coordinated with your diaphragm and with your breathing. So it's important to be aware of like, are you holding your breath a lot? Are you coordinating your breathing with your core control? Okay. Number 7, dear pelvic floor, am I asking you to do the right job? People think about the pelvic floor and they think, well, I need to strengthen it, right? And maybe that's not what you need to do. Maybe you need to relax it. People know the pelvic floor muscles as Kegel muscles. And Kegel is the name of a dude, by the way. It is the name of a gynecologist named Arnold Kegel back in the 40s. He was the gynecologist who identified the exercises to strengthen the pelvic floor muscles. So the muscles kind of adapted the name Kegel muscles, and the exercises got to be named Kegel exercises. And, people think that they're supposed to be doing Kegels all the time. You need to keep them strong. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you need to relax the muscles. Maybe the muscles are so tight because that's where you hold your stress. And so maybe you need to work on softening the tissues and releasing that tension and doing more breathing exercises and meditation and yoga to try to soften those muscles and release the tension in your pelvis. So don't always think strengthen, strengthen, strengthen. Maybe it's relax, relax, relax. Okay. Number 8, do you feel coordinated with the rest of my core? And just like what I was saying before, the pelvic floor is an integral part of the core. And people, when they're working on the core, they think abs. I'm going to do sit-ups. I'm going to strengthen my core from the front. But there's the whole section of the core that's in the back and on the bottom and on the top, right? So diaphragm on the top, pelvic floor on the bottom, back muscles in the back, and your abs in the front. And you have to work on all of that if you're working on core. Think about it if like you have a carton of orange juice, right? And you are shaking it. And that's representing your core. You need to have a stable base to have a strong core, right? So if you're shaking that carton of orange juice, you don't want the orange juice to fall out the bottom, right? You need to have a strong bottom for these, like, if you're thinking about the core as like a pistoning canister, right? Okay. And number 9, am I ignoring your signals, dear pelvic floor? Like I said, your pelvic floor is talking to you all the time. Like even if you're not having a conversation with your pelvic floor every day, your pelvic floor is talking to you. Maybe you're having pain with intercourse. Maybe you're peeing when you laugh, cough, or sneeze. And these are all signs that something's going on. Maybe the pelvic floor muscles are weak. Maybe the pelvic floor muscles are too tight. And if you're having symptoms, your pelvic floor is trying to tell you something. So it's important to check in and assess what the pelvic floor is trying to tell you every day. Okay. Number 10, what can I do to help you feel better this week? Maybe it's going to see a pelvic floor physical therapist. Pelvic floor PT, we can help you with finding your pelvic floor muscles, learning to connect with your pelvic floor muscles, building awareness, and learning to strengthen them, learning to relax them. The important part is trying to see your body as one whole entity, right? And a lot of people feel a little disconnected from their pelvic floors, and they can't find it. They're squeezing their butt muscles instead, or their thigh muscles, or their stomach muscles, or maybe they're holding their breath. But we can help you find your pelvic floors and do what you need to do to either relax them, connect them, normalize the tone, make them work better with your core. We work in a lot of different capacities. Maybe not just strengthening or relaxing is what you need. Maybe you're pregnant and you need some labor and delivery prep. Maybe you need some help recovering from a tough delivery. And we also work with men. So it's not just women who need help from a pelvic floor physical therapist. Men who have issues with the prostate or with groin pain and testicular pain, we can help with a lot. So it's important to check in. Maybe you need better bathroom habits. Maybe you're in a job where you're sitting for 8 hours a day and you're not going to the bathroom. It's important to schedule bathroom breaks so that you have a healthy interval of when you're eliminating stool or urine from your organs. So it's important to have a healthy schedule and not be either going to the bathroom too often or going to the bathroom not enough, right? Scheduling hydration into your day. A lot of people are not drinking enough water. You need to flush out the bladder and keep the bladder lining healthy. So it's really important to be drinking enough, be moving. Maybe you're sitting for a long time and you need to schedule movement breaks. So scheduling an alarm on your phone to just get up and walk around, that helps a really tight pelvis, just to get some mobility in the hips and the pelvic joints. Again, just checking in with the pelvic floor is important. Most people are not having these conversations with their pelvic floor. It's important that you ask some of these questions every day and not just when you're in pain or when you start to exhibit some symptoms. So try checking in with your pelvic floor, if not every day, a couple times a week. And thank you for joining me today for this episode. Join me next week for another episode of Ladies, Let's Talk About It.